The impact of climate change will be felt not just in environmental terms, but will have seismic financial implications on the global economy as well.
Science has been very clear for decades, but we are running out of time. We're entering the decisive decade of humanity's future for many generations to come on planet Earth.
Professor Johan Rockstorm is Joint Director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research and Chief Scientist for Conservation International. Professor, thank you very much for being here today. Please, let's start by telling us about your work and what you're here for at the COP16 today.
Yeah, I'm a professor in Earth System Science at the Potsdam University, but also the director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research in Germany. And we've actually prepared, so our team at the Potsdam Institute, a scientific report for the UNCCD's COP16 work here, where we summarize for the first time the importance of land, not only for livelihoods and food security and human well-being, but also for the stability of the entire planet, how land interacts with 7 of the so-called 9 planetary boundaries. So we have scientifically defined what are the environmental processes that regulate the stability, the resilience, and the livability of the entire planet. And of course, climate is one, but it's only one of 9. We also know that biodiversity, fresh water, land, nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, air pollutants, the stratospheric ozone layer, the stability of the ocean, chemical pollution, and finally what we call aerosol loading, which is air pollutants. All of these together are the biophysical systems that give us the basis for good socioeconomic development. And land is connected to 7 out of these. But not only that, we have scientifically also in this report shown that 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries are outside of the safe space. So we are losing too much forest systems, degrading too much land, but also destroying too much fresh water, too much air pollution, too much biodiversity loss, and of course the climate crisis. And what we show quantitatively is that land is connected to all of these losses and breaching of these boundaries. So to put it simple, if we get it right on land, if we can protect land and have sustainable management of land, we not only build more resilient communities for their livelihoods, we also contribute to the health of the planet. And that's the key scientific message we're trying to convey here, that UNCCD is not only a convention on combating desertification, it's not only about reducing land degradation, it's really a convention that connects to the 2 other Rio conventions on climate and biodiversity for the stability and our ability to deliver on the other UN framework, namely the Sustainable Development Goals. So it raises the whole UNCCD to a new level of importance.
There is a sense of urgency when I hear you talk.
That's right. And, science has been very clear for decades, but we are running out of time. I mean, remember that so much science showed in the run-up to 2020 that we're entering the decisive decade of humanity's future for many generations to come on planet Earth. So what happens between 2020 and 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals period, is decisive also scientifically, because this is the decade when we need to bend the curve of land degradation, of biodiversity loss, of greenhouse gas emissions, and not solve everything by 2030, but we have to have decisively turned a corner and move towards, for example, on emissions, cutting emissions by half. For example, on land, halting the expansion of agriculture. Have we made any progress? No. And it's 2024. We've almost halfway through, and we have so little time left, and the global carbon budget, the land system redundancy, biodiversity loss are getting to a point of us approaching what we define in scientific as tipping points. And a tipping point is when you flip over from a system no longer coping with the pressures that we're posing. And we see more and more signs on land in particular, where, for example, carbon uptake capacity is going down. We're very close to potentially pushing the Amazon rainforest irreversibly on a journey where it loses rainfall generation and carbon sequestration and biodiversity. And all of that is connected to land. So yes, there is urgency.
So today you're here speaking in front of world leaders, also later on economics of water. Are you optimistic that your message will change something or act to change things?
Well, as a scientist, it's almost like you're a bit like Sisyphus. You're pushing that rock up the slope and it starts rolling down, and you just stubbornly continue pushing it up the slope because that's what we do as academics. We really are convinced that the truth and knowledge will in the end tip the scales in the right direction. So of course, I'm not naive to think that it will kind of change things drastically. However, in this Global Commission on Economics of Water, we are providing some absolutely new thinking on reframing freshwater as a global common good. Why? Because 50% of the rain, of the fresh water that we get on land, comes from land. It doesn't come from the ocean. It's rainfall that is generated from healthy ecosystems that evaporate water. It flows as atmospheric rivers and fall downwind. So, for example, Brazil exports fresh water to Argentina, to Colombia, to Venezuela, to Costa Rica. And if we lose the Amazon rainforest, you'll lose that export of fresh water. So we're all connected through fresh water. And that is a new way of thinking of valuing water and therefore a new way of thinking of the economics of water. I think that could be a paradigm shift that I hope will be increasingly understood.
As well as the obvious human and social costs, what are the financial implications if we don't act now?
Well, we have now two studies that have come out quite recently. One looking at climate, showing that already with the climate change, the global warming commitments we have caused so far, and if we continue emitting as today, we will by 2050 have reduced income levels at households by 19%. This is equivalent to $38 trillion of loss in the global economy. And remember that the global economy is roughly $100 trillion. So it's a massive loss for the income. And that is just the climate impacts related to labor productivity and extreme events caused by precipitation, droughts, floods. In the Global Commission on Economics of Water, we've done an updated analysis specifically on water-related impacts on the economy, showing that rich nations are likely to lose 8% of their GDP, and low-income nations up to 15% of the GDP by 2050 if we continue to lose fresh water as today. And these are very conservative numbers because they don't consider loss of ecosystem functions, they don't consider carbon sequestration, they just consider the direct impacts on food and energy and domestic water supply. But 15% loss of GDP because of freshwater degradation in just 25 years' time can be the difference between a functioning and a non-functioning economy. So we're talking double-digit numbers on all these threats today. It's no longer, you remember when Nick Stern produced his seminal report on the costs of action versus inaction on climate change in 2006, shocking the world that it could cost up to 5% of GDP loss if we continued as today, already at that time in 2006. Today, we have made so little progress that the numbers are now, I would argue even as a, as a careful academic, that these are scary numbers.
This is obviously a global problem, but do you see any part of the world leading the action?
Well, when it comes to climate, there's only one leader today, and that's the European Union. That's the only place in the world, well, the largest economic region, by the way, 27 nations that have locked themselves to a legally binding climate law. And the European Union has reduced emissions by over 25% already. Southeast Asia, I think, are really on board and seeing the opportunities and moving ahead. Big economies like China and India are kind of playing a double game. They are really leading on pathways towards renewable energy technology, electric mobility, but at the same time continuing to invest in the old technologies like coal and oil and gas. So that's a concern, but I mean, one has to recognize their need for economic development. I think we should, I have great expectations on Brazil right now under President Lula da Silva and the leadership in the run-up to COP30 next year. So it's a mixed picture, but of course it's a big concern with an incoming president in the United States who is essentially a climate skeptic. And that may have some really significant negative repercussions as well.
Do you feel that the EU model, if we can call it that way, could be or should be copied in the other parts of the world?
I think you put it very well there, because my conclusion is it should be, but could it be? No. I mean,
why?
Because the European Union has chosen the old framework, the equivalent to the Kyoto Protocol that we had previously, namely having legal regulatory compliance mechanisms. So if a country does not meet the legally binding reduction targets for 2030, you get fined. You have to pay very significant fines if you're not delivering on your accounting measures. So it's more a whip system than a carrot system. The US has chosen the carrot system with the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the world's largest investment in green, subsidizing green technologies. I think the world needs more of European type compliance mechanisms.
More of a whip system.
A little bit more whip. I mean, not necessarily only whips, but I think it's proven that you need some pressure to be able to help countries to move in a more rapid decarbonization pathway. And I think we need these kind of regulatory frameworks also in the land policy space.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Thanks for having me.